Welcome to Interviews with Innocence, a podcast about spirituality, consciousness, and exploring the wisdom our children bring into this world. I believe that our very young children are our greatest teachers. After all, they're the masters of living in the present moment, bubbling in unconditional love, enjoying the messiness of life, and curious about the universe in all its dimensions. The pure essence that young children exhibit lives within all of us. My hope is that these interviews will help us discover, embrace, and connect with the sacred core of childhood that resides within each of our hearts. I am your host, Marla Hughes. Today, I am so excited and honored to have Mayo with us as a guest. Michael is an internationally trained medium, astrologer, and spiritual teacher. He developed his mediumship in the United Kingdom under mediums such as Gordon Smith and Eileen Davis at Arthur Findlay College. Michael brings a practical, grounded, and evidential style to his spiritual work. While developing his mediumship, Michael graduated from the University of California, Irvine, with a BA in psychology and social behavior and a BA in drama. With his passion for teaching and helping others discover their own unique spiritual connection, he has taught and studied in the US, Europe, and Australia. Michael is also a second-generation astrologer with over 18 years of understanding astrological theory. He teaches and holds workshops throughout the United States and abroad, helping others explore and personally develop through the understanding of astrology. Blending his many spiritual gifts and skills with a practical, grounded, results-oriented approach, Michael helps you to discover your strengths, what holds you back, and empowers you to discover your own inner strength and grit. He provides a safe, positive, and supportive environment for each person that comes to his workshops, development circles, or consultations. Throughout his many years of working with the spirit world, he has brought messages of love and hope from those on the higher side of life. His greatest mission is to show that life, like love, is eternal. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you, Marla. It's great to be here.
What a beautiful bio. I just want to sign up for everything that you offer. And I'm sure I will. So let's get started. And why don't you tell us a little bit about how you began this journey of mediumship and your interest in spirituality and children?
Yeah, absolutely. So my beginnings of spirituality really kind of go back to one of my earliest memories. So as far as I can remember, one of my earliest memories is wanting to understand and know God. And so that sort of thing, I remember, I didn't grow up in a religious household or anything like that. And I remember talking to a family friend or something and wanting to ask him, can we watch the 10 Commandments movie? Or asking him these different questions about God and the little bits that I had at a very young age. And I feel that was kind of that, I don't know where that came from, that sort of sense within that, there was something bigger and I needed to understand and know this thing. And so that sort of began at a very young age and kind of moved into more traditional forms of discovery of spirituality. So I was Christian for quite some time and discovered, God through that experience. And then later on down the road, I believe I was 18, I stumbled into a mediumship demonstration. And the medium came to me and said, you're a medium, you need to start developing, and one day you'll be doing what I'm doing up here. And for an 18-year-old me, just out of high school, that blew my mind. I was like, I don't even know what this stuff really is. I mean, I'd kind of heard of it before, but, and so I went to my first development circle. And in that experience, I got all kinds of information right off the bat. And because of that, I realized, okay, I guess this guy was right. There's something here. And that sort of began the journey of my spiritual unfoldment, understanding of energy and mediumship and all things psychic. So That's kind of where that began.
Beautiful. Well, I know you said in our pre-conversation that you were a very intuitive child. And what do you mean by that? And how did that shape your childhood?
Absolutely. So that's always an interesting thing because growing up this way, you don't actually realize that you are intuitive. You think that's just how you're going through life. So it wasn't until I actually developed my awareness through mediumship and psychism that I realized, wow, you were having all of these intuitive experiences as a child.
Hmm.
And so looking back on it, I could tell you that. But at the time, I just knew that I was sensitive to people. I understood that I could get overwhelmed in certain situations. I knew that I would get feelings about things, and then they would happen, or dreams would come true, those kinds of things. But I was always very sensitive to the people that were around me, particularly in the family that I grew up in, which was
Yes.
a very emotional sort of place. We're all water signs in our family. Uh, and so we're all very, very emotional. We call it the ocean of emotion. So I
Love
grew
it.
up in that. So we're all very, very sensitive sort of in that way. So it's like, I didn't realize that that was an unusual thing uh, until later. And I look back and go, oh yeah, I guess that was that. And that was this. And so, yeah, it's pretty interesting that way.
Yeah. I know you talked a little bit to get just a little personal. About being premature and when you were born, and my twins were actually very premature when they were born also, and how you believed that for a while you had one foot in and kind of one foot out. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. So I was born almost like 2.5, almost 3 months early. And so I was, in that very, very preemie sort of space.
Mm.
And the doctors were certain that I was going to die. I mean, they told my mom, he's going to die. My dad had a priest come in and give me my last rites. So I'm set for the moment I go now. And I feel very much that in that time period of sort of being either here or there, because anytime a child is born, right, there's a point where I feel that their soul, their energy really inhabits the being. And I
Mhm.
feel that because I was premature, there was sort of that in and out thing. I mean, they were pretty certain I was going to die. So I mean, if we imagine those cases of people in comas, or nearing end of death, I think, and they start to see and experience the other world, I do believe that the beginning of life is similar. So
Yes.
I believe that sort of, we can be in sort of both worlds during a time period when our mental faculty maybe isn't as developed. And that I feel plays a large role in like children in general being intuitive. So as far as me being premature, I was at death's door. And so I feel that had some sort of impact on maybe that's where that understanding that there's something in this life and I have to know this thing called God came from. That's obviously an educated guess and just kind of an internal feeling that there was an important thing I was here to do.
Right, right. And you listen to the stories about near death experiences, and it's a lot of what you're saying right now when you were kind of in between those two worlds.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So how was your experience in school being a really intuitive child and sensitive?
Absolutely. That was a journey, to put it nicely. As a younger child, I feel that I mean, within my family, they could tell that there was something different about me. I would zone out, or I like wouldn't be present with what was happening, around us. And then particularly in school, that was really hard for me because I didn't know. It's hard to know what to focus on when your awareness is being impacted by other things, right? And these are things that within the school environment, they don't account for, right? Or at least the traditional schooling environment. There's other schooling nowadays that seem to take some of those things into consideration. But I feel that with this, I had a really hard time with like the linear things. And with being sensitive to the people around me. I had to always feel, this is kind of interesting, I always had to feel a really close connection with my teachers, like to feel safe and to
Yes.
feel like secure in that. But regardless of all of that, like they put me on medication because they wanted me to be able to focus. And what I find, especially the more and more I develop my awareness now, is this whole kind of practice of our awareness moving into these other spaces, sort of like that daydreaming sort of space, is largely connected to our ability to move in and out of mediumistic awareness. And so I think I was paying attention a lot to what I was feeling and what I was, and that's not what was the curriculum at the time.
Yeah.
So that really played a negative role, I would say, in my ability to be present.
Mm-hmm. What do you think what would have helped you? What do you think your teacher, maybe your parents or the universe, what could have helped you in that time period?
Sure. Yeah. I don't think for everyone the traditional way of going through school is appropriate, because I think you have so many different children and so many different abilities and understanding, that I think it's super important for parents to pay attention to the unique needs of their child rather than everyone sort of being funneled through the same system. We're not all identical, we're not all the same. And I think it's super important for, parents to be aware of this when they're deciding, what the best course of action for schooling is. So I think if you can identify that you have a sensitive child in your class, doing what you can to make them feel safe, doing what you can to support their unique learning abilities, because I think that there's also that in there, and also incorporating maybe in some way their sensitivity to learning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, could you explain that a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And this is sort of something that I'm just sort of forming and thinking about now as I reflect on. But it would be interesting to see if there was some way that we could also encourage children's awareness of their own um, sensitivity, ability to, I think also that plays a huge role in ability to focus, right? And so
Yes.
maybe creating learning segments that are in shorter periods with more breaks, or learning to help them to control their awareness rather than, just responding to um, the normal pattern of behavior. Does
Yes.
that make sense?
Yes, it does. I interviewed Bruce Alderman, and he's traveled the world. And in Indonesia, they had a beautiful school where they had a sacred space where the very young would come in and it were quiet, basically meditated. And he said it was so beautiful, and the intent was to spread that throughout the campus. And the children just seemed to be so much more, I don't know, feeling, trusting their inner guidance. It seemed more creative and having that time. And it sounds like that's what you're talking about a little bit. That might be one part of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know you worked a lot with young children in Australia. Can you tell us a little bit about that with the children? What were the lessons that those children taught you in terms of spirituality and consciousness, and what expand on
Absolutely.
that?
Yeah, of course. So when I lived in Australia, I worked at a childcare center, and I really was around the mostly the 2 to 3 age range.
Right.
And what was really interesting about that is seeing the natural expression of a child's, development, their awareness, their consciousness. Because during that time period, there's a lot of this discovering the I in all of it and starting to have opinions and desires and all of that sort of thing. Whereas before they identified more with mom, right? They were like an
Mm-hmm.
extension of her. And I always loved this age because they were enough that they're going to still listen to me, but at the same time, be able to be their own little person, which I always loved. But what that really showed me, that's really where I get this idea of paying attention to the needs of the individual child, and also, never really downplaying their sort of more spiritual awareness or spiritual experiences. I don't think we should necessarily encourage it, as in try to develop it or deepen it. But I do think that what we need to do is understand the time and space that they're in, right? Because we have so much psychological understanding of a child's development. I think it's important also to take in the spiritual aspect of their awareness and where they are in their personal growth. Does that make
Yes.
sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And you talk a bit about, to segue a bit, you talk that you feel like you chose your particular family for a reason, like of course we all do. So what was the reason you think that you chose your particular family?
Ooh. That's a big question. I definitely think a couple of things. I think that I was very fortunate in picking a family that was going to be accepting of me and who I am as I grew up. And also, I would say I picked this family because of the particular challenges that it brought. I have a theory when it comes to mediumistic awareness, psychic awareness, that sort of thing. I believe that there is a large connection between trauma and our mediumistic states of awareness. So having these sorts of challenges, either yourself or your parents having gone through some sort of either trauma or abuse, has been shown to change and extend change the way our nervous system is, and it's much more sensitive. And so I think it was actually in some ways a requirement for my development, spiritually, I would say, to be in a family where maybe I didn't always feel the safest, or maybe I didn't always get that sense of knowing what's coming next, because it trained my awareness then to have to feel into the atmosphere to see if what was coming, what was I going to deal with that day. Does that make sense?
Interesting. Yeah. So could you explain to the listeners what you mean by mediumistic abilities?
Absolutely. So whenever we are talking about other senses and that sort of thing, oftentimes we're going to talk about how we perceive the other world. So information that our regular thinking brain is not necessarily, I should say our consciousness is not necessarily attuned to for survival. So you have your survival needs, and that's how your brain works. And then you have this other bits of information that are constantly present and aware. But our brain is not wired or trained, I should say, trained to pay attention to that stimulus. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so the way that we perceive these other states of awareness is through what we call the clairs. So clairvoyance, which means clear seeing, clairaudience, which is clear hearing, clairsentience, which is clear feeling, and claircognizance, which is a sense of knowing. And these are the tools that our other awareness, our mediumistic states of awareness, use to sense and perceive. So I know a lot of people out there probably are quite sensitive people, so they might consider themselves empaths or highly sensitive people. Those people oftentimes are going to really rely heavily on clairsentience as a tool, because they're constantly feeling into their environment. They're constantly trying to feel what's happening. And this is oftentimes why other people's emotions and things can have a big impact on them. And of course, I have my own theories as to how we can mitigate that, but that might be for a different time. I don't know.
Well, I'd like to hear a little bit about that, because I think there are so many people, not only young children, but for our listeners who do feel like they literally
feel.
take on other people's feelings and things. So yeah, give us a little bit of insight on your theories.
Absolutely. So I feel that those of us who are considered highly sensitive people, empaths, that sort of thing, we've often had to go through what I described earlier, which is that sense of, at a young age, having to feel into the space around you to make sure that we are safe and that sort of thing, and figure out what's coming. So what I feel happens with these kinds of people is that because they have such a highly attuned sensitivity, now they're still continuously doing that within all of our relationships that we have. So both our personal relationships, our social environments, all of these things. And because our awareness is now tuned to search and feel what's happening with each person, obviously not only searching for bad, but also searching for good, right? Good things and good experiences.
Yes.
We will oftentimes spend too much attention going outward rather than experiencing and taking that sensitivity inward. Does that make sense? And
Mm-hmm.
so because we have this sensitivity that's always reaching out and trying to feel, we oftentimes will take on other people's stuff. I know for myself personally, I've had these experiences where literally my someone I'm very close to's emotions become my emotions, or I feel like they're my emotions. And then I have to go back and go, wait a second, this isn't me. This is this other thing.
Right.
What
Right.
I've learned I have to do then is to take my energy and one, do my best to avoid constantly feeling outward and bring my energy and focus into myself. What is it that I'm feeling? What is it that I need right now? And checking in with myself. The second thing I would say too is because highly sensitive people oftentimes live and exist on so much emotion, I feel that trying to then fill themselves with the emotion they want to impact their environment rather than being receptive to the things coming to them, it's better to then fill yourself with what you want to be experiencing and learn to hold your own energy and space so that now you're impacting those people around you rather than the other direction.
Yeah. And do you do this when you're in a contemplative state, meditation? And it sounds like it's a great time that you would be quiet when you are contemplative like this.
Absolutely. I think that's a great place to kind of reinforce this idea and reinforce, creating that centered sort of self. But I also think that it's about being mindful in the moment when these things are happening. So if you know you're going to be going over to your aunt's house and she's always negative, right? You're going to go in already fortified and ready and going to hold your space and being able to determine this isn't mine, this is yours, you keep that. And I'm going to actually give you some of this happiness, some of this joy, some of this love, because that's really what I think overpowers and overrides a lot of these negative things. Really, compassion, I think, is a huge key in all of this.
Yeah. And I know you talked about how important it is for all to develop a level of discernment for a young child also, which is kind of what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Can you expand on that?
Absolutely. I think really teaching kids often about what they're feeling, what are they experiencing, and having an understanding of that. So that way that their own needs aren't, neglected, but also having a sense of kind of, I guess, teaching them that they're more than just these physical experiences, that there is more to them, and that they can learn to, just like those kids you were talking about, that were doing the meditation and that sort of thing. It's developing that awareness, that mindfulness, and that sense of, I guess, taking responsibility and charge of their energy as much as they can given their development. Does that make
Yes,
sense?
yes. But how would one do that? I mean, for instance, I remember you mentioning if a very young child doesn't want to go up and hug, Aunt Annie Ann or something, and you need
Mhm.
to listen to that and understand their emotions and validate.
Absolutely. I think it's super important that with kids is um, teaching them that their space is their space, that they have autonomy over, what the things that they experience. Because I think oftentimes when we force our kids into these sort of social situations, obviously there's room for encouragement, but without sort of demand. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think that teaching children that their energy is something that they have control over and what they feel confident in understanding that and how that works and how the benefit of it is, because we think about things like self-soothing, right? If a child knows that, I can just start to feel into, if we teach them something very basic, very simple, like that within them there exists a place in them that's going to feel that sense of love or feel that sense of support that they can feel from themselves. You can even use that in creative ways, like, well, for example, like people have imaginary friends, which may not even be that imaginary depending on the situation.
Yes.
But finding those sort of safe places within themselves that they can create that sense of, even in these sort of uncertain times and spaces, I can bring my awareness to this place of security. So it's just a matter of how you sort of help them. It depends on their age and all of that.
Yeah. And then do you feel like it helps them navigate the world in a different way, maybe a more positive way as they get older?
Absolutely. I think that, I mean, we've seen already with, different schools in implementing meditation instead of detention. I don't know if you've ever seen that video,
Yes, I have.
and how they had, the rate of incidences go down dramatically. So if we're already teaching children these things at a young age, we're teaching them coping skills. We're teaching them how to manage and handle their own energy, their own mental and emotional awareness. Like, they all go together. These things aren't separate.
Yeah, yeah. And you are a medium, and you talk a lot about the power of presence. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, so oftentimes when I talk about the power, or sitting in the power, or sitting in the stillness, and what that's learning to do is helping us to get out of our thinking mind, because in our day-to-day life, in our society, we're focused on achieving, we're focused on action, we're focused on making things happen. And I feel very much that the mediumistic states of awareness actually exclude the mind, right? So you actually have to have less mind, less thinking, so that you can become aware and receptive and passive, so that you can receive these otherwise non-experienced vibrations. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so what I often talk about is discovering the presence, the quiet. And what we also often find is, in all religious and spiritual traditions, there is some sort of going into the quiet, going into the stillness, because it's in that space that all of these humans and all these different traditions have discovered, wow, when we go into this quiet, dedicated space, we're actually able to experience and know things that we didn't know before or experienced before. For example, the presence and the stillness and closeness of God. I feel like that's a big and important part. And so when I'm talking about the presence, it can mean, the spirit, it can mean God, or whoever you want to call, that deity for you. You learn to go into that quiet, and it's in that quiet you discover that bigger sense of you.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense? And that's you
Beautiful.
connected to that greater part.
Right. So you said at the beginning of the interview that you, even as a very young child, you were just kind of searching, like, what is God, or whatever name you would like to give the light, and what is a divine connection? Do you feel like you've found that?
Yeah. So what's interesting is, I think, on top of, that search and that desire to understand and know God, I think I was also looking for something to show me that these things that we can't necessarily see with our physical senses, or experience with our physical senses, exists. So I needed evidence for that, because that's just kind of
Yes.
how my mind works, is what's the evidence that these things actually exist. And for me, I would say through mediumship, and discovering how to utilize and work with my awareness, that mediumship really takes you to the threshold of your own inner being. So really what it's showing me is that these things are possible, right? And then as I now move into these other states of awareness, I then start to touch maybe the tip of the iceberg of this thing that I might call God. Because I
Yes.
think that as we discover these different levels and layers of our awareness, we start to tune into parts of ourselves that are far greater than just our own physicality. And when you start to touch and move into those areas, we discover, wow, actually, there's so much more out here. So have I found God? I think I found a roadmap that seems to be working.
Yeah. Well, and when you are a medium for those, and you bring in their loved ones with this evidential evidence, wow, that must just be amazing for you, not to mention the person that you're doing a reading for.
Oh, absolutely. I can't tell you how many times I've done a reading and afterwards tear up, or become like laughing, or just some sort of like just awe that I often will feel after a reading, because there's no logical reason why someone can sit in front of me and I can know things about their, loved ones, and details into their lives and circumstances happening presently, and then things happening, in the past and the future, and all of these things. And I know that these things aren't coming from my mental thinking awareness. It's not a
Right.
matter of just reading, small subtle cues. The kinds of information that come through, it goes far beyond that. And so for me, there's been so many times where I've done a reading, and I literally just sit there after the client leaves and just go, wow, thank you. Like, thank you for letting me experience this, because this is just more evidence to me that there's something so amazing, something so real out there that I'm connecting with. And I just want to deepen that. I want to know
Yeah.
that more. I want to explore that.
And how does that, this beautiful journey, how has that made you walk in life a bit differently?
Oh, absolutely. So having this sort of understanding. So I think there's a key thing that happens in a lot of people's spiritual development, and it's the understanding of going from believing to knowing.
Yes.
And that is a step that I really hope for everyone that they get to have that experience in their life where that transition happens, because it makes a big difference when you know that there's this spirituality. You almost surrender in some way. So I feel that one thing I've learned definitely from having this understanding is that I don't actually have to direct and control and manage, my life as such. I can actually just learn to flow and learn to recognize and feel what is the direction that things are flowing for me. And one of the things that I often tell, I live by, is this idea of following the open doors. So whenever, let's say I'm trying to manifest something, and I use that term very, very lightly, but let's say that there's something that I could benefit from or want, I often will just offer that up to the spirit and say, hey, if this is possible, if this connects and works with what I'm meant to be doing, can that happen? And then I completely let it go, completely forget about it. But then I stay open for the open doors. Do I see an open door? And if it seems to flow that way, then I just move that way. And I can't tell you how much ease comes in life when you're not trying to force things, when you're just learning to accept and move with. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. It's just absolutely beautiful and very thought provoking. And you need to ask, right?
Absolutely. I think that putting out what you were, wanting for, but I think also the biggest part is realizing what is it you're asking for and why, right? If it's just, I want this big house because I want this big house, like,
Right,
okay, it's
right.
not really benefiting you in any way. But if it's for a greater purpose, if it's for moving your development or your awareness forward, and this is just a step in that direction, I think that that's oftentimes, I've seen, at least in my own life, that's taken care of. But again, to go back to that idea of, um, how the spirituality and this awareness has helped me, is that I actually let go of what I think I want. And what's really weird is in some ways there's a freedom in surrendering to a divine purpose.
Mhm.
There's sort of this stress that is relieved, because now, one, you're not swimming against the grain, and two, you know that you're being guided towards something.
Right.
And I think it just also takes away a lot of the wants of life as well. It's like you
Yeah.
sort of just start to go with what is happening.
And it seems it does, or do you think it takes you back to more of like a childlike state of when you were?
I mean, definitely in the sense of being led and being cared for and being looked after. I mean, there's very much this sense within me, of feeling secure and safe within, where my life is headed, if that
Yes.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I know that I'm watched. I know that I'm looked after. The relationship that I had with those guides and helpers who work with me, um, make me aware that that's happening.
Yes. Beautiful. Well, we need to wrap it up. I'm so sorry. I hope you can come back and talk about more about this topic and also your astrology. I can't wait to hear more about that. And
Absolutely.
so, if someone wants to find you, could you tell us how?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on pretty much all social media. So my website is Medium Michael Mayo, Mayo.
Great.
And then my Facebook is facebook.com/medium Michael Mayo. My Instagram is at medium Michael Mayo. So I kind of try to make it as easy as possible for everyone to find me. And then my YouTube as well is medium Michael Mayo as well. So it's all the same thing. I have a thing for alliteration. So medium Michael Mayo makes me really happy.
Perfect. And this will also be in my show notes after, when you look up the interview. So Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show, and really appreciated it. Great information.
Oh, you're so welcome, and I'm so honored to be on it, and I'm happy to come back whenever you'd like.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. You have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening in today. If you want to learn more about the show, you can find us at interviewswithinnocence.com and on Facebook or Instagram at Interviews with Innocence. Please write me a message, tell me what you liked, and let me know what else you would like to hear. I would love to hear from you. And if you liked what you heard, please leave us an iTunes rating and review. It helps other listeners find the show. Thank you.